The morning had started the way most good mornings do, quietly, and with coffee I didn't have to share. I had been in Portland for 4 days, sitting across from the legal team at Ashford Meridian's Pacific Northwest partner firm, working through the kind of documents that don't make it into casual conversation. Trust restructuring, successor clauses, the language that protects what you've built long after you're not in the room to protect it yourself. I had flown out Sunday evening while Daniel was at a dinner with his colleagues, leaving a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Back Thursday. Don't forget to water the plant." He had texted back a single thumbs-up emoji, which I had learned over 7 years of marriage was his primary mode of emotional expression when he was preoccupied. He was often preoccupied. The Tuesday sessions ran long, the Wednesday sessions ran longer, and by Thursday morning, my lead attorney, Carla Reyes, had looked up from the table and said, "Claire, we're done. Everything's signed. You could take the noon flight if you wanted." I had looked at my phone. Daniel's last text was from the previous night. "Working late, don't wait up." And on impulse, I had thought, I'll surprise him. I'll show up at the office with coffee from that place he likes on Burnside, and I'll walk into his building and watch him look up from whatever spreadsheet he's frowning at. And for once, we'll both remember what it felt like in the beginning. I was, in retrospect, very good at believing what I wanted to believe. I landed at PDX at 12:40, took a car service downtown, and kept my rolling bag in the trunk because I wasn't planning to stay long. Just long enough to see his face. The driver, a quiet man named Terrence who had a pine tree air freshener and a podcast about cold cases playing at low volume, dropped me at the corner of 5th and Morrison. I tipped in 30% and told him to keep the meter running. I'd be 20 minutes, maybe 30. Meridian Capital occupied floors 17 through 22 of the Whitmore Tower, a glass and steel building that caught the afternoon light in a way architects call dynamic and everyone else calls impossible to see out of in summer. I knew the building. I knew it the way you know a place you've visited so many times it stops feeling like someone else's space. I knew that the security desk on the ground floor was staffed by a man named Greg on weekday afternoons, that the elevator bank on the left ran faster than the one on the right, that the lobby level had a dry cleaner, a sandwich shop, a bank branch, and, tucked into the far corner near the fountain, a jewelry boutique called Harlow & Glass that specialized in what their window signage described as statement pieces for life's defining moments. I knew all of this. I had never explained to Daniel why I knew it. I walked through the revolving door and into the cool, climate-controlled air of the Whitmore Tower lobby, and I was reaching into my bag for my phone to text Daniel that I was downstairs, guess where I am, when I saw them. They were standing at the Harlow & Glass display counter. Daniel had his back mostly to me, but I knew the way he stood. Right shoulder slightly lower than the left, weight on his back foot when he was relaxed, suit jacket open because he always ran hot. The woman beside him was facing the counter, her profile sharp and composed. Dark hair cut to her jaw, a cream blazer. The kind of posture you develop when people have been watching you walk into rooms your whole career. I recognized her immediately. Diana Cho, CEO of Meridian Capital. Daniel's boss. The woman whose name appeared in every company email I had ever accidentally seen on Daniel's open laptop. Always in the sender field, always with a subject line I told myself not to read. The sales associate behind the counter was holding a ring. Not a piece of art from a glass case, not a pendant or a bracelet. A ring. A diamond ring, set high, the stone catching every ambient light source in a 40-foot radius. Daniel reached out and took it from the associate's white-gloved hand, and he held it up the way you hold something precious, the way you hold something you've thought about for a long time. Diana Cho laughed, a bright, unguarded laugh that I had never heard in any of the company events I had attended on Daniel's arm, and she put her hand to her chest. Then she extended her left hand, and Daniel slid the ring onto her finger. I took 3 steps backward. My shoulder blades found a marble pillar. I put my hand flat against the cool stone and I breathed. Once, twice, a third time, and I watched the way you watch something that doesn't fully register yet. The way your brain takes in information and queues it up for processing later when you're somewhere private. My phone buzzed. Daniel's name on the screen. A call. I watched it buzz, watched his name pulse 3 times and go dark. He was still looking at Diana Cho's hand. He hadn't checked who was calling. 13 seconds later, it buzzed again. Same name, same 3 pulses, dark. Then a third time. I put the phone in my coat pocket. I looked at the fountain to my left. A low basin, water moving in a slow circular current. A few coins on the bottom from people who had made wishes here and gone about their days. I looked at the elevator bank. I looked at the ceiling, which was 30 feet of coffered concrete and recessed lighting that someone had once told me cost $2.4 million to install. I had never told Daniel that I knew that number. I had never told him how I knew it. I walked to the bench nearest the fountain, the one with the clean sight line to the entrance of Harlow and Glass, and I sat down. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to a name that wasn't in alphabetical order, because I had filed it under a different letter than his actual first name. A small habit from years ago, when I preferred that certain conversations not be easy to trace on a shared screen. I pressed call. Marcus Webb picked up on the second ring, the way he always did. Claire. His voice was the same as it had been for 11 years, measured, low, the voice of a man who had heard a great many things and responded to all of them with the same level of considered calm. I wasn't expecting you until next week. Change of plans, I said. I was watching Daniel through the glass. He was handing the ring back to the associate now. Diana was still looking at her own hand. I need you to convene the board. 48 hours. A pause. Not surprise. Marcus didn't do surprise. Assessment. Agenda. Leadership review. I looked away from the glass. And a vote on the existing executive structure. Another pause, fractionally longer. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Should I prepare the Clause 7 documentation? Yes. Claire. His voice shifted, not to softness exactly, but to the register he used when he was speaking to me as something other than a client. Are you all right? Across the lobby, Daniel had finally checked his phone. I watched him frown at the screen, then glance around the lobby in a way that was automatic and unworried. The glance of someone who expected to see nothing unusual, because their life was still, as far as they knew, perfectly arranged. He didn't look toward the fountain. He didn't look at me. I'll be better in 48 hours, I said to Marcus. Make the calls. I hung up. I sat for another 2 minutes, watching the fountain. Then I stood up, walked back through the revolving door, and got back into Terrence's car. That was fast, he said. He wasn't available, I said. Terrence nodded like that was a perfectly sufficient explanation, turned the Cold Case podcast back up, and pulled into traffic. I texted Daniel from the back seat. Flight got in early, taking a car from the airport. See you at home tonight. His reply came 40 seconds later. Great, can't wait. Picking up dinner on the way? I put the phone face down on the seat beside me. Outside the window, the Whitmore Tower shrank in the rearview mirror, its glass face catching the afternoon light, dynamic and impossible to see through. The house was empty when I arrived. I had expected that. Daniel had texted at 5:12 that he was wrapping up a meeting and would be home by 7. Don't order without me, with a pizza slice emoji that I had once found endearing. I changed out of my travel clothes, unpacked my bag with the methodical efficiency of someone who needed their hands occupied, and then I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop and a glass of water, and I looked at the shared calendar. We had kept a shared calendar for 6 years. It had started as a practical thing. 2 busy people, 1 house, the logistical need to know whose turn it was to be home for the plumber, or the window installation, or the quarterly HOA meeting. Over time, it had become the primary way we communicated our whereabouts to each other. I looked at Daniel's entries for the past 14 months. I am a thorough person. I have always been a thorough person. It is both my best quality and the one that makes me, I have been told, somewhat exhausting to argue with. I looked at the entries. I looked at the patterns. Late meetings that started at 6 p.m. and had no listed attendees. Off-site strategy sessions with no location. 1 recurring block, every other Thursday, labeled simply D/C, Project Sync. that had been on the calendar since the previous October and that I had, at the time, read without curiosity. 14 months. The recurring block had started 14 months ago. I closed the calendar. I opened a different application, a secure file vault that existed on my laptop under a folder named with a series of numbers that looked like a software update version, and I reviewed the Ashford Trust documentation one more time. Not because I needed to. I had read it so many times I could recite the operative clauses. I reviewed it because I wanted the numbers in my head, exact and clean, before the conversation I was about to have. 51.3% of Meridian Capital Group's outstanding shares, held in perpetuity by the Ashford Family Trust, beneficiary and sole trustee, Claire Ashford Webb. Webb was my mother's maiden name. I had taken it as a professional alias 11 years ago, before I met Daniel, when I was 26 years old and had just inherited the trust my grandfather had structured before his death, and decided, with the advice of a very good attorney named Marcus, that the cleanest way to hold significant assets was quietly, without a last name that pointed back to the family home in Connecticut or the real estate holdings or any of the other things that changed the way people looked at you in a room. Daniel's last name was Park. I had taken it when we married, and in every context that touched our shared life, our home, our social world, the charity boards I sat on under his arm, I was Claire Park. Clean and uncomplicated, the wife of a rising executive at a mid-size capital management firm. The wife of a man who did not know that the firm he worked for belonged, in the majority, to her. I had thought about telling him. In the early years, I had thought about it the way you think about a door you could open. Aware of its existence, choosing not to turn the handle yet, telling yourself there would be a right moment. Then the moment kept not arriving, and the years accumulated, and eventually the secret had become so much a part of the architecture of our life that dismantling it would have required dismantling everything around it too. I had told myself this was a reasonable explanation. Sitting at my kitchen island at 6:43 p.m. with 14 months of D/C, Project Sync in my head, I was beginning to understand that I had been using it as one. Daniel came home at 7:12. He came in through the garage door, which he always did, and he had brought Thai food from the place on Belmont that we ordered from more often than we cooked. And he set the bags on the counter with the easy, unsuspecting confidence of a man who believed the evening was going to be exactly what it appeared to be. "Hey," he said. He leaned down and kissed my cheek, the brief, habitual press of lips that married people develop, the kind that means I see you without meaning much else. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn for 4 years and something else faintly underneath it. Something that might have been the interior of a car that wasn't his. "How was Portland?" "Productive," I said. "Everything got wrapped up early." "Good timing." He was opening containers, setting out chopsticks. "I would have come to the airport if I'd known." "I know," I said. "I wanted to surprise you." He looked up, a small, genuine smile. "You should have. I was just in meetings all afternoon. Nothing exciting." I held his gaze for exactly the amount of time that felt normal. "How's Diana?" Not a flicker. That was the thing about Daniel. He was genuinely good at the smooth surface. He had the kind of face that didn't betray what was underneath unless you had spent 7 years learning to read the edges of it. "Fine," he said. "She's got the board breathing down her neck about the Q3 projections, so she's been in rare form." A mild eye roll. The eye roll of a loyal subordinate performing minor exasperation. "You know how she gets." "I do," I said. We ate dinner. Daniel talked about the Q3 projections. He talked about a colleague named Brent who had made a presentation with a graph that had the axes labeled incorrectly. He talked about a podcast he'd started listening to on his commute. He was warm. He was present. In the way that people who have been lying for 14 months become present when the lie is running smoothly. There's a kind of ease in it, I think. The ease of a story that has been told so many times, it no longer requires effort. I listened. I asked follow-up questions. I have been told, a very good listener. After dinner, Daniel fell asleep on the couch watching television, which he always did when he was tired and comfortable. I washed the containers, dried my hands, and went upstairs to the room I used as a home office. I sat at my desk. I pulled up a secure email thread with Marcus and confirmed. Board meeting, Thursday, 10 a.m. Whitmore Tower, floor 19. Please confirm attendance of all 7 members. Marcus's reply came within 4 minutes. Confirmed. We'll have Clause 7 package ready by Wednesday night. Claire, do you want me to prepare the secondary documentation as well? I typed back. Yes, all of it. Then I opened a second browser tab and looked up the Harlow & Glass boutique on the Whitmore Tower lobby level. Their website was clean and minimal, the way luxury retail websites always are. I scrolled to their portfolio page. There were 3 diamond engagement rings in their current collection. The one in the center, cushion cut, platinum setting, 4.1 carats, was listed at $47,500. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I closed the browser, turned off the desk lamp, and went to bed. Daniel came up at 11:30, sliding into bed in the dark the way he had 1,000 times. And within minutes, his breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of sleep. I lay on my side and looked at the ceiling and thought about the shared calendar, and 14 months, and the way Diana Cho had laughed, that unguarded, unperformed laugh, when Daniel held the ring up to the light. Whatever else was true, that laugh was real. That was the thing I hadn't expected to feel. Something that wasn't anger exactly. Something more like grief for a version of the story I hadn't known I was telling. Because the alternative version, the one where Daniel had fallen genuinely in love with someone, where 14 months of Project Syncs were not calculation but feeling, was, in its own way, more devastating than simple greed. I let that thought sit with me for a while. Then I set my internal alarm for 6 a.m., the way I always did, and I went to sleep. The next 2 days, I was a portrait of normal. I went to my yoga class Wednesday morning. I had lunch with my friend Petra, who talked for 40 minutes about her kitchen renovation and asked me twice if I was okay because I was being very quiet, and I said I was just tired from the travel. Wednesday evening, Daniel and I watched a movie, and he made popcorn and put his arm around me on the couch. And I let him, because removing it would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. Thursday morning, I dressed carefully. Gray wool trousers, a white silk blouse, my good blazer, the one that was cut precisely enough to make people unconsciously adjust their posture when I walked into a room. Low heels, because I would be standing for parts of the meeting and I preferred to be stable. No jewelry except the watch my grandfather had left me. A Cartier tank. Slim and old and worth more than it looked, which was the version of things I had always found most interesting. I kissed Daniel goodbye at the door. He was heading into the office for what he believed was a routine Thursday. He had no reason to think otherwise. The board meeting notice that Marcus had sent to the 7 members of Meridian's board had gone through official trust channels, not the standard Meridian internal communication system. So nothing had flagged in the company's email or calendar infrastructure. Standard protocol for a Clause 7 convening. The executives would not be notified until the meeting was already in session. "Have a good day," Daniel said. "I will," I said. I meant it, actually. In an odd way, I genuinely meant it. Floor 19 of the Whitmore Tower was a conference level. 3 large rooms, a smaller breakout space, a kitchenette, and a view of the Willamette River that on clear days made even difficult conversations feel, briefly, like they were happening in a painting. Thursday was a clear day. I arrived at 9:40 and spent 20 minutes in the smaller breakout room with Marcus, going through the documentation one final time. Marcus was 63, silver-haired, and had the unhurried quality of a man who had been the most competent person in a great many rooms and no longer felt any need to announce it. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather portfolio that I knew contained, among other things, the original Ashford Trust Incorporation documents, a certified shareholder register showing the 51.3% position, 7 years of audited financial statements, and a 40-page secondary report that his firm's forensic accounting team had prepared over the previous 36 hours. "The secondary report," I said. "Walk me through the headline findings." Marcus opened the portfolio. Beginning approximately 14 months ago, a series of discretionary expense approvals were routed through the VP of Strategic Initiatives, Daniel Park, for authorization. The approvals bypassed standard dual-sign protocols by being classified as executive discretionary under a standing delegation of authority that Diana Cho had issued. He paused. The categorization was, technically, within the delegation's scope, but the destination accounts for 13 of those approvals, totaling $382,000, resolved to a single LLC incorporated in Oregon 8 months ago. I had known this was coming. I had asked for the investigation, and I had known, in the particular way you know things you don't want to know, what it was likely to find. Still, hearing the number spoken aloud in the clean light of the conference room did something to the air in my chest. "What's the LLC?" I asked. "Park Cho Holdings." He said it simply, without editorial. The LLC was established with 2 signatories, Daniel Park and Diana Cho. I looked at the river. $382,000, siphoned in increments through a discretionary approval process over 14 months into a jointly held company. It wasn't the money that landed heaviest. It was the logistics, the deliberate, sustained logistics. You don't set up an LLC with your affair partner on a whim. You don't route 13 separate transactions through a carefully constructed delegation of authority loophole on a whim. This was architecture. This had been planned. "Does Diana know about the financial component?" I asked. "The LLC has her signature," Marcus said. "Whether she understood the full mechanism, the sourcing of the funds, is a question the secondary investigation will need to answer. It's possible she was told the money came from legitimate bonuses or personal capital." "Is it possible?" I said. "Or is it likely?" A pause. Given the documentation of how the approvals were classified, it would have required Diana to be either complicit or remarkably incurious about the origin of several $100,000 entering a jointly held account. I nodded. "Okay, Claire." Marcus set down his pen. "I want to make sure you're prepared for today. When we go into that room, the dynamics are going to shift very quickly. Some of the board members have worked alongside Diana Cho for years. There may be resistance." "There may be," I said, "but not for long." At 9:58, the 7 members of Meridian Capital's board of directors filed into the main conference room. I recognized most of them. Harold Finch, the chairman, who was 71 and had known my grandfather's business partner. Sandra Lim, who managed 2 of the firm's largest client relationships. 3 others whose names I knew from documents and whose faces I recognized from the company's annual reports. And 2 I had seen only in photographs, newer appointments from the past 3 years, made under Diana Cho's tenure. I was already seated at the far end of the table when they came in. Marcus sat to my right. Most of the board members glanced at me with the polite, slightly puzzled expression of people encountering someone in a room who doesn't fit their existing map of who should be there. Harold Finch sat down and looked at Marcus. "Counselor, your notice indicated a Clause 7 convening. That's an extraordinary measure. I assume we have a significant matter before us?" "You do," Marcus said. He reached into his portfolio and produced 7 identical packets, which he slid down the table with the ease of someone who has run many important meetings. "Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Claire Ashford Webb, sole trustee of the Ashford Family Trust, which holds 51.3% of Meridian Capital Group's outstanding shares." The shift in the room was not loud. Significant things rarely are loud. It was a change in posture, a stiffening, a drawing in, the collective recalibration of 7 people who had just been told that the architecture they were standing in belonged to someone they had never seen before. Harold Finch looked at me. His expression was not unfriendly. It was the expression of a man reorganizing a great deal of information very quickly. "You're Richard Ashford's granddaughter." "I am," I said. "He was a private man." "It runs in the family," I said. A brief silence. Then Harold Finch did something I hadn't entirely expected. He smiled. Small, measured, but genuine. "All right," he said. "What are we here to discuss?" I opened my copy of the packet. The current leadership structure of Meridian Capital, and some findings from a forensic review of the firm's discretionary expense authorizations over the past 14 months. The door to the conference room opened. Diana Cho walked in. She was composed, the way she always appeared in the photographs I had seen. A quality of controlled energy, everything directed, nothing wasted. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and a silk shell in deep green, and she carried a tablet and a leather folio, and she had clearly been told there was a board meeting convening, but had not yet been told why, because her expression as she scanned the room was professionally neutral, the expression of a CEO who has walked into unexpected situations before and managed them. Then her eyes landed on me. She didn't know me. We had never been formally introduced. We had been at the same company events, peripherally, in the way that a senior executive and a colleague's spouse are sometimes peripherally in the same space. But she had no reason to know my face from anything other than Daniel's wife, a category of person whose presence at a board meeting would be, to say the least, unusual. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the packets on the table. She sat down in the chair that was clearly meant for her, the one across from Harold Finch, with the tablet charging cable already plugged into the table port. With the measured composure of someone who had decided that composure was the right response until she knew more. "Diana," Marcus said, "thank you for joining us. We'll begin." He did not introduce me again. He simply opened the packet. For the first 20 minutes, Marcus walked the room through the shareholder register and the trust documentation. The board members asked questions that were precise and intelligent, because they were intelligent people. And Marcus answered each one in the complete and methodical way that had made him the right person to hold these documents for 11 years. Diana Cho listened. Her face gave away very little. Once, she glanced at me. Just briefly, the assessing glance of someone trying to place a variable, and I met her eyes without expression and looked back at Marcus. Then Marcus reached the secondary report. He didn't summarize it. He read the operative section aloud, which was the approach we had agreed on, because the precision of the language mattered, and summary introduced the possibility of mischaracterization. 13 discretionary expense approvals. $382,000. Park Cho Holdings, LLC. 2 signatories. The room was very quiet. Diana Cho's composure held for approximately 4 seconds after Marcus stopped reading. Then something in it fractured. Not dramatically, not the way things fracture in films, with tears or raised voices. A smaller fracture. The kind that shows up in the set of a jaw, in the sudden stillness of hands that had been, until that moment, moving slightly, naturally, the way hands do when a person is listening with professional attention. "The LLC," she said. Her voice was controlled. "I need to understand what you're saying about the LLC." "Park Cho Holdings was incorporated in Oregon 15 months ago," Marcus said. "Your signature appears on the incorporation documents as co-registrant." "I know that," Diana said. "Daniel told me it was a personal investment vehicle, something he'd set up for—" She stopped. The stillness in her hands intensified. "The capital in the LLC," Marcus continued, "sourced from the 13 discretionary approvals I described, routed through Meridian's operating accounts." Silence. "He told me," Diana said carefully, "that those were his personal funds. Year-end bonuses and personal savings he wanted to invest in a side vehicle." A pause. "He said the dual-sign protocols didn't apply because he had standing delegation authority." "He had standing delegation authority to approve expenses for the firm," Marcus said, "not to redirect firm capital into a personal LLC." Diana Cho looked at the table. Then she looked at me. "Who are you?" she said. Not hostile, something more stripped down than that, genuine. "I'm Daniel's wife," I said. A pause that lasted several seconds, several very full seconds. "And the trust," she said. "My grandfather built Meridian," I said. "He structured the trust before he died. My mother held it, and when she passed, it transferred to me." I kept my voice even. "Daniel doesn't know." I watched her absorb this, watched the information move through her, the particular expression of someone reorganizing not just facts, but a story, an entire story they had believed, the ground shifting under the foundation of something they had been standing on. "He doesn't know," she repeated. "No." She was quiet for a long time. The river outside the window caught the sun. Harold Finch turned his pen over in his hand once, twice, and set it down. Sandra Lim looked at her packet. The room held the specific hush of 7 people who understood they were watching something that was not, primarily, a business matter. "He told me," Diana Cho said, and her voice had changed. The control was there, but something else had entered it, something that sounded like the beginning of an anger that had no clean place to land. "That you were quiet, that you kept to yourself, that you weren't really interested in his career." "I know," I said. "He's said that to me too, about other people." She looked at me for a long moment, then she looked at Marcus. "What happens next?" What happened next was the part that people always imagine happening all at once, in a single dramatic scene with everyone in the room at the same time. It doesn't work that way. What happened next was administrative and procedural, and because of that, far more final than any confrontation could have been. The board voted to suspend Diana Cho's executive authority, pending a full forensic review of Meridian Capital's financial records. The vote was 5-2. The 2 dissenting members were the ones appointed under Diana's tenure, which was predictable, and which Marcus had prepared for by ensuring that the Clause 7 provisions gave the majority shareholders' trustee the procedural authority to call the vote, regardless of preliminary resistance. Harold Finch cast his vote without hesitation. Sandra Lim did the same. The motion passed at 11:47 a.m. Diana was asked to surrender her key fob, her executive access credentials, and her company-issued devices before leaving the building. She did so without protest. I watched her set her phone and her laptop on the conference table with the precise, deliberate movements of someone whose alternative to precision is something they have decided not to do. She picked up her leather folio, personal property, exempt from the surrender protocol, and she turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. She didn't turn around fully, just a partial turn, enough that I could see her profile. "For what it's worth," she said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the part I believe." She left. The board spent another hour with Marcus, going through the procedural next steps. Appointment of an interim CEO, timeline for the forensic review, notification requirements for Meridian's institutional clients. I participated in these discussions with the same level of attention I brought to everything. And by the time Marcus and I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby at 1:15 p.m., the morning felt both very long and oddly compact, the way important mornings often do. We stood near the fountain, the same fountain where I had sat 2 days ago. "You need to eat something," Marcus said. "I will," I said. "Give me 20 minutes." He nodded and went to find coffee. I sat on the bench and I sent Daniel a text. "Can you come home at lunch? I'd like to talk." His reply came 11 minutes later. "Everything okay? Just want to talk. Can you come home?" A longer pause, then, "Yeah, give me 30. He arrived at 1:58. I was sitting at the kitchen island, the same place I had sat Tuesday night, watching him arrange Thai food containers with easy, uncomplicated confidence. There was no food now, just the island, 2 glasses of water, and a manila envelope that I had positioned to the right of my glass, where he would be able to see it from the moment he walked through the door. He saw it. I watched him see it. Something shifted in his expression, small, quick, gone, before he schooled it back. "Hey," he said. He leaned against the counter rather than sitting down, not ready to be seated, already managing the room, calculating. "What's going on?" "I was in the Whitmore Tower lobby Tuesday afternoon," I said. "My Portland meetings ended early. I thought I'd surprise you." The calculation behind his eyes continued, quiet, fast. "I saw you at Harlow and Glass," I said. "With Diana." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it takes a person to make the decision between 2 different kinds of response. He chose the one I had expected. "Claire." "I don't need you to explain it," I said. "I'm not here for that conversation." "Then what conversation are you here for?" 14 months, I said. "The recurring calendar block, D/C, Project Sync, and the LLC." The second shift, harder than the first. The LLC was the thing he hadn't expected me to know. "What LLC?" he said. Not a question, a reflex. Park Cho Holdings, I said. Incorporated 15 months ago. $382,000 in capitalization, sourced from Meridian's discretionary expense accounts through approvals you classified under Diana's standing delegation authority. I looked at him. That's not a mistake, Daniel. That's a system. The color had left his face in the particular way it does when a person understands that the situation is not the size they thought it was. How do you know about the LLC? He said. I slid the manila envelope toward him. He opened it. Inside, 2 documents. The first was a copy of the board meeting minutes from that morning, with the suspension motion and the vote tally. The second was a single-page summary of the Ashford Family Trust's shareholder position in Meridian Capital Group. He read slowly. I watched his eyes track the page. I had thought about what I would feel in this moment, had sat with it for 2 days. And what I found, now that it had arrived, was something quieter than I had prepared for. Not triumphant, not even fully satisfying. Sad, perhaps, in a clean, stripped way. The sadness of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has finally set it down, and is feeling both the relief and the particular ache of the weight that's gone. Daniel set the papers on the counter. He looked at me for a long time. 51%, he said. 0.3, I said. You own the company. He said it not as an accusation, almost as a statement of wonder. You own the company I work for, the company Diana runs. Ran, I said. Something moved across his face. What does that mean? The board suspended her executive authority this morning, I said, pending the forensic review of the expense accounts and the LLC. He pressed his hand flat on the counter, the same gesture I had made against the marble pillar in the lobby, I realized. Something to push against. Why are you doing this to her? She didn't know where the money came from. I told her. I know what you told her, I said. That's not my primary concern. Then what is? You committed financial fraud against a company I own, I said. That concern is fairly self-explanatory. Claire. He said my name differently now, not the way he had said it Tuesday night at dinner, easy and habitual, differently. Like someone who is rediscovering the shape of a word. How long have you known about the trust? Since before we met, I said. And you never... He stopped, tried again. Why didn't you tell me? I had thought about how to answer this. I had thought about it for 2 days and for many of the years before that, in the quiet moments when I turned the door handle question over and over without opening it. And I found, now, that the truest answer was the simplest one. I wanted to be known for something that wasn't money, I said. I wanted to see who you were when there was nothing at stake. He looked at me, and I saw it, saw him understand in that look what I meant. Not just the statement itself, but the years behind it and what those years contained. And what did you see? He asked, very quietly. I saw someone who was more interested in where he was going than where he was, I said. And I kept thinking that would change. I picked up my glass of water. It didn't change. He looked at the counter, at the papers, at the envelope. The LLC, he said. I can pay it back. That's between you and Meridian's legal team, I said. And eventually, depending on what the forensic review finds, the DA's office. That's not my conversation to have with you. He looked up. What is your conversation? I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I set a second envelope on the counter, smaller, white, sealed. That is. He picked it up, opened it, read it. Divorce papers, he said. And a notice that your access to the joint accounts has been suspended pending legal proceedings, I said. My attorney will be in contact with yours this week. He set the papers down. He stood at the counter for a long moment, and in that moment he looked younger than 41, and he looked tired, and he looked like a man who had spent a great deal of energy on a particular version of the future and had just learned that the future was not a version he was going to be in. There was something almost pitiable in it. Almost. I didn't think, he said, that you cared this much about any of it, the company, the money. I thought you were... He stopped. "Quiet," I said. "I know, you've said." He left at 2:34 p.m. He didn't take anything with him that first time, just his keys and his phone. He called twice from the driveway before driving away, as if he thought I might pick up. I didn't pick up. I went upstairs and I stood at the window and I watched his car until it turned the corner and was gone. The street was empty and ordinary. A mailbox, a maple tree beginning to think about turning for fall, a neighbor's kid riding a bike in slow, wobbling circles that suggested she was recently graduated from training wheels and was proud of herself, and correctly so. The house was very quiet, not the bad kind of quiet. A different kind. The kind that arrives after something that has been ongoing for a long time has finally, completely stopped. In 3 days, Daniel's attorney would contact Marcus to begin the divorce proceedings. In 8 days, the forensic review would conclude that the unauthorized transfers were prosecutable under Oregon's financial fraud statute, and the DA's office would open a preliminary inquiry. In 2 weeks, Diana Cho would retain her own counsel and provide a full statement cooperating with the inquiry, detailing exactly what Daniel had told her about the source of the LLC's capital. And the gap between what she had known and what had been done in her name would become, legally, a meaningful distinction. In 6 weeks, a settlement on the unauthorized transfers would be reached that did not require prosecution, but required Daniel to repay every dollar, personally, over a structured timeline, with interest. But that was all later. Right now, there was only the quiet, and the street, and the child on the bicycle, and one question still sitting unanswered in the room. The question Daniel had asked before he left. Why didn't you tell me? I had answered it. I had given him the true answer. The wanting to be seen for something other than money. The wanting to know who he was when nothing was at stake. All of that was true, but there was another part of the answer. One I hadn't said aloud because the right time to say it, I was beginning to understand, wasn't to him. The letter took me 3 evenings to write, not because I didn't know what I wanted to say. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, had known it in some form for years, but because the shape of it kept shifting as I got closer to the end. The first night, I wrote 2 pages and deleted them. The second night, I wrote 4 pages and kept half. The third night, I sat at my desk until midnight and finished it, and when I was done, I read it back once, quietly, and then I folded it and put it in a drawer and left it there. I never sent it. It wasn't written to be sent. It was written to be said, here, now, to the part of me that needed to hear it out loud before I could move forward. So this is that letter, or close enough to it. Daniel, you asked me why I never told you. I told you part of the answer. The part about wanting to be known for something other than the trust, something other than the Ashford name and what it meant and the zeros behind it. That part is true. I was 26 when my mother died and left everything to me, and I had spent my whole life watching people rearrange themselves around money, watching them become useful or resentful or hungry in ways that had nothing to do with the person and everything to do with the number. I didn't want to be that number. I wanted to find out if there was a person separate from it, and I wanted to find out if the people I let close could see that person without the number beside her. You passed, in the beginning. I want you to know that. For the first 2 years, you passed completely. You were curious about me, about my opinions, my preferences, the specific texture of how I moved through the world. You asked me questions that didn't have any tactical value. You called me on Tuesday evenings for no reason. You once drove 40 minutes in the wrong direction because I mentioned offhand that I liked this particular bakery, and you wanted to see my face when I got a croissant I hadn't expected. I thought, this is who he is. I think you were. For a while, that was genuinely who you were. But I also think, and this is the part I couldn't have said to you across the kitchen island without it turning into something defensive and unproductive, I think I was watching you and filing away what I saw instead of saying what I saw. I think that's my part of this. I kept the door closed for so long that I stopped noticing I had a door at all. I let 7 years accumulate inside that silence, and the silence became its own kind of distance. And you are not entirely wrong that you didn't always know where I was. You were wrong about why. But you weren't wrong that I had become, over time, a person who kept her most important rooms locked. I thought that was protection. I think it was also loneliness. There is a difference between being quiet and being invisible. I confused them. I told myself I was choosing quiet, choosing to observe, to hold my cards, to know more than I showed. What I didn't say, to you or to myself, was that I was also afraid. Afraid that if you knew the full shape of things, the trust, the majority stake, the years of parallel life I had been living, you would see me differently. That the number would replace the person. That you would love what I owned instead of who I was. The irony, of course, is that you ended up loving someone else entirely. And I spent 14 months not seeing it. Not because the signs weren't there, but because I had spent so long practicing the skill of not looking too closely that I had gotten very good at it. I want to be clear about something. This is not, primarily, an expression of regret. I am not writing this to wish things had gone differently. Or rather, I am, but only in the sense that you wish a different road had been there. The road that was there was the road we walked. What I'm saying is that I see my part in it. I built a house with a secret room at the center, and I let you live in it for 7 years without telling you the room existed. And that is not a neutral thing to do to another person. It doesn't excuse what you did. Nothing excuses the 14 months, the LLC, the ring you bought her with money that passed through my grandfather's company. Nothing excuses the deliberate architecture of that. But I can hold my own accounting and yours at the same time without one canceling the other. You asked, why didn't you tell me? The honest answer is, I was afraid of what would happen if you knew everything. And then the thing I was most afraid of happened anyway, and you didn't even know everything. There's something almost useful in that. I put the letter in the drawer and went to bed and slept better than I had in weeks. The weeks after that were busy, in the way that endings always are. Not dramatic, just dense with logistics. The divorce proceedings moved through their early stages with the efficient rhythmlessness of legal processes that are not contested in the core facts, only in their translation to paper. Daniel retained a good attorney. I retained Marcus, which was not exactly a fair fight, but fairness was a courtesy I was no longer extending in that particular arena. The Meridian Capital Forensic Review concluded its primary phase in 10 days. The report was thorough and, in places, grim reading. Not because the amounts were catastrophic to a firm of Meridian size, but because the methodology was so deliberate. 13 transactions over 14 months, each one individually small enough to pass through standard review, collectively amounting to $382,000, routed with a precision that suggested it had been planned from early in the relationship. Daniel had not stumbled into this. He had built it. I thought about the croissant. The 40-minute drive in the wrong direction. I filed those memories in a different place and moved on. Diana Cho's cooperation with the inquiry was complete and well documented, and the forensic team's conclusion matched what she had told the board. She had genuinely believed the LLC capital was Daniel's personal funds. Whether her belief was willful or credulous was, as Marcus had noted, a question the evidence couldn't answer with certainty, and the legal team proceeded accordingly, which is to say that Diana faced consequences for the LLC's existence and her signature on the documents, but not for the sourcing of its capital. She resigned formally from Meridian on the 14th day. The resignation letter was clean and professional, and said nothing about the underlying circumstances. I read it once and filed it. 3 days after Diana's resignation, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Then I picked up. "Mrs. Park?" said a voice I recognized, despite having only heard it once, in that conference room, in those stripped-down seconds. "It's Diana Cho." I sat down. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to know I'm not calling to argue anything. I'm past that." "Okay," I said. "Did you know," she said, "before Thursday, did you know about us? About the 14 months? I thought about how to answer. I could have been clean about it, told her that I had seen them through the window, had made one phone call, had come to the board meeting from a position of full knowledge. That was the accurate answer. "I saw you at Harlow and Glass," I said, 2 days before the board meeting. Silence on the line. "He was going to propose," she said. It wasn't a question. "It looked that way," I said. A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that I recognized. Not grief exactly, but its aftermath. The specific quality of someone who has already done the heaviest grieving and has come out on the other side where there's more clarity than feeling. "I thought he was telling me the truth," she said. "About his marriage, about what it was." She paused. "He said you were separate from each other, that you'd been separate for a long time, that you both knew it." "I know," I said. He's good at that, at describing the shape of something so that it sounds like the truth. "I'm sorry," she said, "for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," I said, and I meant it. Not completely, but enough. "Are you going to be all right?" A pause that held something complicated. "I don't know yet," she said. "I built something real at that company. It was mine in a way that—" She stopped. Anyway, I agreed. "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Go ahead." "What are you going to do with it? The company?" I had been thinking about this. I had been thinking about it since Thursday, since the vote, since I sat at the fountain and watched the coins on the bottom moving in the current. The answer had been arriving slowly, the way real decisions arrive when you stop trying to force them. "I'm going to bring in an interim CEO from outside," I said. "Someone the board selects. And then I'm going to sell 2% of my position." "Why 2%? "Because 51.3 gives the trust operational control," I said. 49.3 doesn't. I don't want operational control. I never did." I looked at the window. Outside, the maple tree had made its decision about the season and was now fully, committedly gold. My grandfather built that company because he was passionate about it. I've held it because it was his. But it was never mine in the way it needs to be mine for me to run it well. "Someone should run it who wants to be there," Diana said. "Yes," I said, "someone should." We were quiet for a moment. Not a tense quiet. The quiet of two people who have been in the same wreckage from different positions and are standing in the aftermath, sorting through the pieces. "I hope things get better for you," she said. "I think they will," I said. And again, I meant it. I booked the flight to Seattle on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the board meeting. Not for work, not to close anything, or sign anything, or sit across a table from anyone with a portfolio of documents. I booked it because I had been to Seattle 11 times on business, and I had once walked past a farmer's market on a rainy October morning and bought a cup of coffee, and stood under the awning and watched the city go about its day. And I had thought, I would like to be the kind of person who comes here just for this. I landed on a Thursday. I checked into a hotel near Pike Place Market. I did not open my work email. I walked for 2 hours in a light rain and bought a coffee from a small stand run by a man who told me, unprompted, that he had been making coffee in this spot for 19 years and still liked it. I ate dinner alone at a restaurant with good light and no televisions, and the woman at the table next to me was reading a novel with a broken spine, the way people read books they love, and I thought, that is what I want to look like. That specific absorption, that presence in a room. I stayed for 4 days. On the last morning, I sat at a cafe table with a legal pad, actual paper, not a screen, and I wrote down, slowly, the things I was going to do differently. Not resolutions, not a list of accomplishments, just the ways I had been invisible to myself and what I was going to change about that. I had spent 11 years protecting the trust by keeping it secret, protecting myself by keeping it secret, protecting what I wanted to be seen as by controlling what could be seen. And the result was a life with a room at the center that nobody could enter, including, in the end, me. The room is still mine. That much hasn't changed. But I've unlocked the door. I thought, on the plane home, about the thing Diana had said. Someone should run it who wants to be there. And I thought about how long it had taken me to understand that the same principle applied to my own life. Not the company, the life. I had been present in it without fully being there, careful without being honest, protected without being safe. The divorce was finalized on a date in November that I now think of mainly as the first day of a new accounting period. Daniel settled the repayment of the LLC funds on a structured schedule. He moved to an apartment in the Pearl District and started at a new firm in January. I heard this through Marcus, who had no opinion on it, and reported it the way he reported everything. Accurate, complete, without commentary. I did not feel triumphant when it was done. I want to be clear about that, because I think the shape of this kind of story is supposed to end in triumph. The overdue accounting finally delivered, the villain revealed, the woman who was underestimated walking out of the building with her chin up and a look that says, "Now they know." But that wasn't what the ending felt like. It felt like something had run its natural course. Like a long, slow season, finally reaching its endpoint and handing itself off to whatever came next. I once read that the most dangerous thing about being underestimated is not the way others see you. It's the way their certainty can, over time, start to become your certainty too. They think you're not watching, and you stop watching. They think you're not counting, and you stop counting. They think you're not there, and slowly, gradually, you arrange your own life to accommodate their belief, pulling back, going quiet, becoming the version of yourself that fits into the story they've already decided to tell. The way out of that is not to correct them loudly. The way out is to remember, in the private room where you keep your actual self, exactly what you know, and then to wait for the moment when it matters. What I know is this. I am Richard Ashford's granddaughter. I hold 51.3% of a company that grew for 30 years before I was born and will grow for 30 years after me. I loved a man who didn't know me as well as I thought, and I was a wife who kept the most important door closed. And both of those things are true at the same time. I am learning to sit with that. I am also learning that the question is not what will people think when they finally see what you have. The real question is simpler. Older. What will you do with the room you've been keeping to yourself? He spent 14 months learning how to leave. He never spent 14 minutes learning who I was. That was his mistake. Somehow, in the end, it set me free.